Hi everybody, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today we're going to do an experiment to put my most scandalous statement to the test, which is I don't like my wine to be aerated.
No! No!
What I said was this. We talk with wine, we savor it, we enjoy it. Therefore, I want to witness my wine's development in the glass. And I still mean it. And that's exactly why I have set up this little experiment for us today. I have 3 identical bottles of a young Bordeaux. One was opened 24 hours ago, one was opened 2 hours ago and decanted, and one was freshly opened just before filming. The idea is that aeration is supposed to soften the tannins and improve the wine, but does it really? I truly believe we have these wonderful wine glasses. They are large enough to allow plenty of space for the wine to react with air and develop in the glass. Wine is not a shot of vodka that you quickly gulp down just to rinse with another beverage or bite of a pickle. Wine actually spends time in the glass so we can converse with it, see how it develops. At first, it might show different aromas than 10 or 15 minutes later, and an hour later, it may have developed even further. So why not spend that time with wine? My argument is this: are you really better off with that bottle of wine or decanter put on the piano, waiting for that perfect moment to enjoy it? Or is it better to follow its development in the glass and later reminisce about the wine? At what stage did I enjoy it the most? Maybe your preference differs between Bordeaux and Chateau, for example. However, as much as I would love to, we cannot exactly make a several-hour video where I sit with a glass of wine, slowly get tipsy, and tell you how it has developed over the time. But what we can do is to address all those comments from people who rolled up their sleeves ready to fight me, telling that wine needs to breathe before you drink it. Let the wine breathe. But have we ever actually done an experiment to see at which point we like it the most? Or are we just blindly following rules that have been copied and repeated for decades? So I am dedicating this video to late Alexis Bespalov, the author of the Signet Book of Wine, who, when discussing wines need to breathe, simply said, don't bother. If there's one wine that's said to truly need breathing, it's the red wine. Some will argue that older wines need time to breathe, but most will say that it is actually young, tannic red wines that benefit the most. The idea is that aeration helps to soften and roundin those harsh and astringent tannins. So I have chosen 3 identical bottles of a recent vintage Bordeaux, a challenging year, 2021. This wine is more than 90% Cabernet Sauvignon, so it fits perfectly for this little experiment of ours. But before we start, I want to say something that might come across a little stubborn, but I want to say it now before the tasting. No matter which wine I personally prefer today, whether it's the one opened 24 hours ago, the one opened 2 hours ago and decanted, or the one freshly opened, I still stand strong with the idea that we should follow wine's development in the glass. Wines are different. There's a reason we might prefer one Bordeaux estate over its neighbor. They have different styles. And just as wines vary in style, they also develop differently in the glass. So why we should treat them all the same when it comes to aeration? Okay, so let's start our little experiment. While I was outside, my cameraman switched the glasses, so I don't know which wine is which. I know the label of all of them, they are the same wine, but I don't know how long has each wine been aerated or has been breeding. So we have wine 1, 2, and 3. So let's start with wine number 1. Force of habit is usually to inspect the color. However, it is not of interest for us today. Okay, so wine number 1. This wine seems quite shy on the nose. I do feel slight notes of blackcurrant, cassis, some spicy characters as well. There's also some of that bay leaf, some garrigue, some Mediterranean spices on the nose, but it is not really expressive nose-wise. Let's taste it. So this was my first sip of the alcohol today. Naturally, I feel alcohol a little bit here. We do have kind of elevated tannins. They are quite youngish and powerful. Slightly astringent, but I think that would be the issue of the vintage. The tannin actually dominates here on the palate. We do have slightly fruit, but it kind of disintegrates quite quickly. Let's move to wine number 2. Okay, so it's interesting because this seems almost like a different wine, because on the nose, this seems more open, definitely showing more fruit and riper fruit profile, kind of ripe blackcurrant, ripe strawberries. It seems sweeter on the nose. Yes, this actually is really, really shy. And this gives you much more. So, interesting thing. Wine number 2, I had more fruit. I had sweeter, riper fruit. It was more fruit dominant as opposed to wine number 1 on the nose. On the palate, however, both of these wines seem very similar. So it also had that elevated tannin, that really kind of young, harsher style of the tannin, which, as I said before, is the indication of the vintage. And also because it is quite young wine, there has not been enough time for those tannins to polymerize, to kind of come together. So let's move to wine number 3. Okay. So this seems shy again, but it is giving fruit. It is kind of opening up, like it seems that way. And here we have some of that kind of red berry, strawberry, raspberry nose, but we also have some florals. It definitely shows some of like lilac or some orchard fruit. And somehow I do feel a little bit of spiciness, probably coming from oak, not necessarily like vanilla or sweet toast, but more like kind of smoky element in it. Okay, so this is really funny. On the nose, wine number 3 felt kind of like an opening flower. I don't know, it could be confusing, but I did felt some of those strawberries, raspberries, those really delicate, kind of elegant fruit styles. On the palate, however, structure is the same. We do feel the same tannin here. It is elevated, it is fresh, it is slightly greenish naturally, but I don't know why, but for wine number 3, I thought that on the palate, I felt the most fruit. Because in wine number 1 and wine number 2, the fruit kind of really lost its momentum quite quickly, while in wine number 3, I felt it lingered a bit longer. It stayed there. It kind of had a bit of stickier feeling. So in conclusion, all 3 wines, when we talked about structure, felt really similar on the palate. What I felt distinct differences between was the nose here. So I think wine number 1 still is the shyest. Wine number 2 is actually probably the most intense on the nose, but it shows both kind of vanilla and toast, as well as those kind of really ripe and sweeter fruit styles. While wine number 3 shows opening fresh and kind of crunchier fruit style and some of those floral elements. So I will say this, the least favorite for myself was wine number 1. And the most liked was wine number 3. Somewhere in the middle for my personal tasting was wine number 2. So let's reveal the wines and see how we did. Wine number 1. I already feel by the weight of the bottle, that's the empty one. So this is the aerated for 2 hours in the decanter. So this is wine number 1. This is the one that I liked the least. It's things are getting really interesting. Wine number 2. Oh, okay. So wine number 2 is wine that we poured freshly in the glass. That leaves wine number 3, wine that was left for 24 hours to breathe in the bottle. Okay, 24 hours.
Yeah.
For 24 hours, breathe in the bottle. But before we move on, I want to say something regarding this specific wine. When we opened it yesterday, I just opened it, removed the cork, and that's it. So it was full bottle, and if we want to be really precise, there's not a lot of oxygen that can actually interact with the wine because the bottle is quite full, and we were not kind of shaking it in any way or introducing more oxygen within it. So it was staying really still. So I would say that this wine probably received less oxygen than wine number 1, because wine number 1 was poured in another vessel, so it was actually breathing quite a lot. So every single wine molecule was in contact with air, as opposed in this bottle. Interestingly, despite me quite enjoying serving wine in the decanter because it looks more aesthetically pleasing on the dinner table, we now see that I personally liked that wine the least. So the next time I'm going to do it for aesthetical reasons, I will definitely not leave it for too long in the decanter. But I mean, I am still a fan of letting my wine breathe and open up and evolve and develop in the glass. So I will continue to do exactly just that. So my last final words I wanted to say about this little experiment. So wine number 2 actually was the most intense on the nose. So if you like that freshness, that energy, make sure to do not aerate your wine before. But what I wanted to say about wine number 3, which was 24 hours opened bottle, was that yesterday when I opened it and I left it here in the studio to breathe, I felt kind of silly or dumb, and I thought, oh my God, what a waste of absolutely beautiful wine. And you know, it's not a cheap bottle, but seeing that this wine could actually survive those 24 hours, and not only survive, but kind of still hold it together and still be lovely and juicy and fruity on the nose, it was quite surprising for me. So yes, it seems that wine can actually withstand a lot more than we sometimes tend to think. So that was also interesting for me. In the wine world, another controversial topic is wine glasses. So make sure to watch that video next.